Hello, this is Christopher Sands, and today on the Hudson Report, we plan to talk about international trade policy, North America, and the 2008 presidential elections. In the United States, trade policy belongs to the Congress. Under the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, the Congress alone can change tariff rates because, initially, tariffs were the only source of revenue for the federal government, or the major source of revenue for the federal government. As a result, when tariffs became a problem in international trade, presidents would have to seek not only the approval of the Senate to ratify tariff reduction treaties, but also the approval of the House to surrender revenue that otherwise would come up to the federal treasury. Congress is a very important part of the 2008 elections, with all of the seats in the House of Representatives and 35 seats in the U.S. Senate up for re-election this year. That's 35 more than the 33 that we normally see because we have two special elections to fill the back end of terms that have already begun. With so many congressmen running for re-election, it's important to begin by looking at how Congress considers trade. Congress for a long time supported more trade tariffs, more barriers to trade to protect local interests. But after the Second World War, a consensus formed in the United States that tariffs were actually causing problems, making it more difficult for the United States economy to prosper. Initially, they gave the presidents of the United States the ability to reduce trade barriers in large General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade negotiations, the so-called GATT talks. These continued for much of the second half of the 20th century. However, over time, Congress began to be concerned with two things. One, the degree to which other countries offered U.S. fair market access, and two, the extent to which the United States was being hurt by imports. This led Congress to begin making amendments to trade treaties. As the United States executive branch brought treaties back for ratification, Congress would make changes to the treaties before they were passed into law that amounted to a second round of concessions by foreign trading partners. Countries resented this very deeply and in some cases refused to talk to the United States about tariff reduction until some agreement could settle this double negotiation policy. The United States President went to the Congress and negotiated a new arrangement called Fast Track, now called Trade Promotion Authority, under which the Congress agrees to ratify a treaty without amendment or an agreement without amendment once it's brought to it by the administration. That means they may, of course, reject the treaty, but they won't try to amend it and exact a second round of concessions. This fast-track arrangement was in place when the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement and NAFTA were negotiated. Both the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement and the North American Free Trade Agreement, however, went further than trade treaties had ever gone before, addressing investment rules, intellectual property, and national treatment. By going so far into other areas of economic activity, they raised many concerns on the part of Congress. Then, during the Clinton administration, when the Uruguay round of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was completed, even the WTO, as it was formed, went into these new areas that many in Congress considered domestic governance, not merely trade policy. As a result, there was a breakdown in U.S. support for further trade liberalization. Bill Clinton, who began as president with a trade promotion authority in place, lost that after the passage of the Uruguay round. Congress refused to renew it. President George W. Bush began asking for trade promotion authority, received it, but then had it rejected when he came back for further trade promotion authority later in his term. There are serious questions about whether the next Congress, the 111th U.S. Congress, will be willing to grant trade promotion authority to the next president, the 44th President of the United States. This is important because during this campaign, we've seen in the presidential primaries real doubts about trade. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, in their debates in Ohio during the Ohio primaries, suggested that they might be willing to renegotiate or even cancel the North American Free Trade Agreement if they couldn't receive additional concessions on labor standards and environmental standards. John McCain and his running mate Sarah Palin have been supportive of trade liberalization across the board and supportive of honoring American agreements, including the NAFTA agreement. What none of the candidates have talked about so far is the Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America. This initiative, launched during the second term of President George W. Bush in 2005, brings the governments of Canada, the United States, and Mexico together to talk about removing non-tariff barriers, such as regulatory barriers that stop trade, that make trade more expensive, but otherwise have no purpose that relates to the economy. Many people in Canada and Mexico feel non-tariff barriers are the most important obstacle to greater trade among these three countries, and they've used the SPP to try to put these things on a trilateral and sometimes bilateral agenda. It's likely that all of the presidential candidates, whoever wins in November, are likely to continue some form of the Security and Prosperity Partnership. However, if Barack Obama is elected president, we have a particularly important opportunity to address his concerns about the environment and about labor by having the SPP reworked to raise standards across North America to a higher level. This trilateral process, which provides a standing platform for such negotiations, could be easily adapted. John McCain, on the other hand, has shown a greater respect for federalism, that is, the legitimate ability of U.S. states and Canadian provinces and even Mexican states to regulate in their own areas. His view is perhaps we should be more respectful of those jurisdictional lines. So under a McCain administration, we might see the SPP adapted to include state and provincial governments, which would provide greater transparency overall. In the best case, we would see all of these things, a continuation of negotiation on non-tariff barriers, and a renewal of U.S. leadership on trade liberalization. But at this point, we can't be sure of any of that. So North America will watch carefully how trade policy evolves after November of 2008. I'm Christopher Sands, and this has been a Hudson Report.